The hardest fall is the one that begins with absolute confidence. The ballroom shimmered beneath towering crystal chandeliers, every polished marble floor reflecting rivers of golden light as a string quartet floated softly through the air, blending with quiet laughter and the delicate clink of champagne glasses. It was the kind of charity gala where old money greeted new fortunes with practiced smiles, where every tailored tuxedo and designer gown whispered success before a single word was spoken. At exactly 7:30, the grand entrance opened, and Ethan Walker stepped inside with the confidence of a man convinced life had rewarded every decision he had ever made. Beside him walked Olivia Foster, his beautiful fiancée, wearing an elegant ivory evening gown that caught the light with every graceful step. Her diamond engagement ring flashed beneath the chandeliers, and Ethan noticed more than one guest glance toward it. He enjoyed that. He enjoyed every second of being seen. His shoulders stayed relaxed, his smile effortless, his hand resting lightly against Olivia's back as though the entire evening had been arranged for their arrival alone. The room seemed to welcome them with approving nods, familiar greetings, and polite admiration. Ethan accepted each compliment with easy charm, believing he belonged exactly where he stood. Tonight wasn't just another fundraiser. It was proof that his life had moved forward exactly as he had planned. He had built a successful business, found someone younger, vibrant, admired, and everyone around him appeared to agree that fortune favored him. Olivia leaned closer and whispered, "Everyone seems to know you." Ethan laughed quietly. "That's the advantage of staying in the game." She smiled, slipping her arm through his, unaware that a single unexpected face would soon make every confident thought inside Ethan begin to unravel. A waiter passed carrying crystal flutes filled with sparkling water and champagne. Ethan accepted one without looking, scanning the room more out of habit than curiosity. Executives. Donors. Local politicians. Familiar investors. Nothing surprised him. Until his eyes stopped moving. Across the ballroom, standing near an arrangement of white orchids beneath a softly illuminated staircase, was Claire Bennett. She wasn't surrounded by people. She wasn't trying to attract attention. She wasn't dressed to outshine anyone else. Her midnight blue gown was elegant without demanding admiration, her jewelry understated, her posture relaxed as she quietly listened to an elderly woman speaking beside her. She smiled gently, the kind of smile that belonged to someone completely comfortable in her own silence. Ethan blinked once, almost questioning whether he had actually seen her. Of all the places. Of all the nights. Claire slowly turned her head, and their eyes met across the crowded ballroom. There was no anger. No regret. No surprise. She simply recognized him, offered the smallest polite smile, then returned her attention to the conversation she had been having, as though nothing extraordinary had happened at all. That unsettled him far more than he expected. Olivia noticed his attention drift. "Do you know her?" she asked casually. Ethan hesitated for barely a heartbeat before answering. "My ex-wife." Olivia followed his gaze and studied Claire for a moment. "She looks different." Ethan forced a small laugh. People change. But something inside him quietly disagreed. This wasn't the woman he remembered leaving behind. The Claire in his memory had carried hope in her eyes, searching for explanations that never came. The woman standing across the ballroom carried something else entirely. Peace. And somehow, that simple difference made the elegant room feel a few degrees colder. Ethan lifted his glass, pretending not to notice her again, yet his attention kept drifting back no matter how many conversations surrounded him. Around them, the gala continued exactly as planned. Servers moved gracefully between guests. Soft music echoed beneath glittering chandeliers. Laughter floated through the room like background music. No one else seemed aware that an invisible thread had just pulled two unfinished lives back into the same place. Ethan believed he had walked into the evening as the winner of a story that ended years ago. He had no idea that for Claire, the story had never been waiting for him to return. It had already become something entirely different. Ethan tried to convince himself that seeing Claire again meant nothing, yet the conversation around him became little more than distant echoes as memories he had buried years earlier quietly returned without invitation. Before the tailored suits, before the business awards, before investors learned his name, there had been a cramped one-bedroom apartment with unreliable heat during the winter and a tiny kitchen where Claire somehow managed to turn inexpensive groceries into dinners that felt like celebrations. Every Friday night they would spread paperwork across the old dining table, calculating bills down to the last dollar, promising each other that one day those difficult seasons would become stories they laughed about. Claire believed that promise with her whole heart. She worked full-time at a neighborhood marketing agency, then spent evenings helping Ethan polish presentations, proofread proposals, and prepare for meetings that she never attended herself. She celebrated every small victory as though it belonged equally to both of them. When Ethan doubted himself, Claire reminded him why he had started. When he failed, she quietly helped him stand back up. She never asked for recognition because she believed they were building one future together. Then success arrived faster than either of them expected. One contract became 3. 3 became 10. New clients introduced Ethan to wealthier circles, exclusive clubs, expensive restaurants, and conversations filled with people who measured value differently than Claire ever had. Slowly, almost too slowly to notice at first, his priorities shifted. Business dinners replaced quiet evenings at home. Weekend trips became networking opportunities instead of time together. The phone that once stayed face down during dinner never left his hand anymore. Claire noticed every change but chose patience over confrontation. She assumed pressure was temporary. She believed that once everything settled, the man she married would come back. Instead, one evening he arrived home unusually calm. There was no argument waiting. No raised voices. He simply placed his car keys on the kitchen counter and looked around the apartment as though he had already emotionally packed everything that mattered. Claire remembered the silence more clearly than the words themselves. It was the kind of silence that warned a life was about to divide into before and after. Ethan finally spoke, his voice steady and almost detached. He said they had grown into different people. He said success demanded different expectations. Then he looked directly at her and quietly added, "I deserve someone who fits the life I have now." The sentence did not sound cruel when he said it. That was what made it unforgettable. Claire did not cry immediately. She simply stood there holding the grocery bag she had carried home minutes earlier, feeling the weight of ordinary things that suddenly belonged to a future she would face alone. Fresh bread. Milk. Pasta. The simple plans of an ordinary evening dissolved into complete uncertainty. Their divorce happened with surprising efficiency. Friends chose polite neutrality. Mutual acquaintances slowly disappeared. Within months Ethan's photographs began appearing online beside influential people, luxury hotels, and glamorous events. Claire saw none of them because she stopped looking. She packed what she needed into a rented moving truck, drove nearly 300 miles to another city, rented a modest apartment, and quietly started over without announcing it to anyone. Back inside the glittering ballroom years later, Ethan accepted another handshake while his attention continued drifting toward Claire. He remembered the woman who had once built dreams beside him with unwavering faith. What he could not understand was the woman standing across the room now. She carried none of the disappointment he expected to see. There was no bitterness written across her face, no desperate attempt to prove she had moved on. Somehow, the absence of pain unsettled him more deeply than any accusation ever could, because for the first time since their marriage ended, Ethan found himself wondering whether the story he believed he had won had actually continued without him in ways he had never imagined. Claire remained near the sweeping staircase, listening patiently as the elderly donor finished describing a scholarship program that had helped hundreds of first-generation college students. She asked thoughtful questions, smiled warmly, and thanked the woman before excusing herself with effortless grace. Nothing about her movements suggested she had noticed Ethan watching from across the ballroom, although she had been aware of his presence from the moment he walked through the entrance. She simply refused to let an old chapter interrupt the life she had carefully rebuilt. Ethan, however, found himself searching for reasons to look in her direction again and again. Every conversation became shorter than it should have been. Every laugh sounded forced. Olivia noticed the distraction long before he admitted it even to himself. She gently touched his arm and followed his gaze once more. "Would it be awkward if I introduced myself?" she asked with genuine curiosity. Ethan hesitated, then gave a casual shrug. "You can if you want. It has been years." He wanted to sound indifferent, but somewhere beneath his calm expression lingered a quiet desire to prove that he had made the right choice. Olivia crossed the ballroom with confident steps, her smile polished and welcoming. Claire turned as she approached and offered the same courteous expression she had given every other guest that evening. "Hello," Olivia said pleasantly. "You must be Claire." "I am Olivia Foster." Claire extended her hand. "It is nice to meet you, Olivia." Their handshake was brief, respectful, and perfectly civil. Olivia admired Claire for a moment before speaking again. "Ethan mentioned that the two of you were married a long time ago." Claire nodded gently. "Yes. That was another season of life." The answer carried no bitterness and no hidden challenge. It sounded like someone describing a city she had once visited before continuing her journey elsewhere. Olivia smiled politely. "Life has certainly changed for all of us." Claire answered with a quiet smile. "It usually does." Ethan finally walked over, holding two sparkling water glasses, handing one to Olivia while acknowledging Claire with a courteous nod. "It has been a while," he said. "It has," Claire replied. "I hope life has treated you well." Ethan smiled. "I cannot complain." He expected another question, perhaps curiosity about his business or his engagement, but Claire simply inclined her head as though the conversation had reached its natural conclusion. The silence unsettled him, so he filled it himself. "Olivia and I are getting married this fall. We have been planning the ceremony for months." Olivia lifted her left hand naturally, the diamond catching the warm ballroom lights. "It has been exciting," she added cheerfully. Claire looked at the ring for only a second before meeting Olivia's eyes again. "Congratulations. I hope the day is everything you both dream it will be." There was no envy in her voice. No hesitation. Only sincere kindness. Ethan waited, almost expecting disappointment to appear somewhere across her face. It never did. Instead, another guest approached Claire to ask about a charity auction item, and she excused herself with an apology so graceful that neither Ethan nor Olivia could object. She walked away without looking back. Ethan watched her disappear into another circle of guests, feeling strangely invisible for the first time that evening. Olivia studied him quietly before asking, "She seems happier than I expected." Ethan forced a small laugh that sounded less convincing than before. People know how to pretend. Yet even as the words left his mouth, he realized he did not believe them. Across the ballroom, Claire laughed softly at something another guest had said, the sound light and unguarded, untouched by the past standing only a few yards away. Ethan tightened his grip around the stem of his glass without noticing, unable to explain why the woman he believed he had left behind no longer seemed to need any proof that she had survived without him. Claire stepped onto the quiet terrace overlooking the city skyline, welcoming the cool evening breeze after the warmth of the crowded ballroom. Below, thousands of lights stretched across the streets like tiny reminders that every window carried a story no one else could fully understand. She rested one hand lightly against the stone railing and closed her eyes for only a moment before another memory quietly surfaced. Years earlier, after leaving the apartment she had once called home, there had been no dramatic breakthrough waiting for her. No miraculous opportunity had appeared overnight. There had only been long mornings, unfamiliar streets, and the exhausting work of starting over from nothing. Her new apartment overlooked a parking lot instead of a skyline. The furniture came from second-hand stores. She measured every grocery bill carefully and learned how surprisingly peaceful an ordinary evening could become when no one made her feel as though she was never enough. Every sunrise became another small promise that healing rarely arrived all at once. It arrived through routine. Through quiet. Through choosing to continue. Claire accepted an entry-level marketing position at a non-profit organization, even though it paid less than the career she had left behind. The work mattered. The people were kind. For the first time in years, no one measured her worth by the names printed on business cards or the size of quarterly profits. She rediscovered simple joys she had forgotten existed. Saturday mornings with fresh coffee from the neighborhood bakery. Long walks through a nearby botanical garden. Volunteering at literacy programs where children celebrated every new book they learned to read. Little by little, she stopped asking herself why the past had happened. She became more interested in who she wanted to become next. Her confidence returned quietly, not through dramatic victories but through ordinary days lived with honesty. She earned promotions because she listened more than she spoke. She gained respect because she consistently kept every promise she made. The woman staring back from her bathroom mirror slowly became someone she genuinely admired. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, everything changed in the most ordinary way imaginable. Claire entered a small independent bookstore to escape the weather. While reaching for the same history book as another customer, both of them laughed and apologized at exactly the same time. The man smiled warmly. Before stepping back. "Please," he said. "You saw it first." His name was Nathan Cole. He wore a simple navy jacket, carried an umbrella that had clearly lost its battle with the rain, and spoke without the polished confidence that often surrounded wealthy executives. They spent nearly 20 minutes discussing books before realizing neither of them had looked at a clock. When they finally walked outside together, the rain had already stopped. Nathan never asked whether she had been married. He never searched for painful stories hidden behind careful smiles. Instead, before they said goodbye, he simply asked, "Would you like to have coffee sometime next week?" There had been no grand speech, no dramatic rescue, and no promise that he would fix her life. He treated her as though she already possessed everything necessary to stand on her own. Standing on the terrace years later, Claire smiled faintly at the memory before returning inside the ballroom. Across the room, Ethan noticed her reappear and once again found himself watching her without understanding why. He assumed he was looking at someone whose greatest chapters belonged to the past. He had absolutely no idea that the most extraordinary part of Claire's story had not begun after the divorce because she found another man. It had begun the day she finally discovered her own peace, long before fate quietly introduced Nathan Cole into her life. Nathan never tried to impress Claire with expensive restaurants or carefully rehearsed speeches. Their first coffee was at a quiet neighborhood cafe where the chairs did not match, the music played a little too softly, and the owner greeted nearly every customer by name. Nathan listened more than he talked. When Claire apologized for speaking too much about a literacy fundraiser she was organizing, he smiled and said, "You only speak that way about things you truly care about." It was such a simple observation that it caught her completely off guard. He noticed her passion instead of trying to redirect the conversation toward himself. Week after week, their friendship grew without pressure. Some Saturdays they explored farmers' markets. Other weekends they wandered through museums or attended free outdoor concerts in the park. Nathan never hurried the relationship. He never asked questions that forced Claire to reopen old wounds before she was ready. Months passed before he quietly asked whether she had ever been married. Claire looked out across the lake where they had been walking and answered honestly. "Yes. It ended years ago." Nathan nodded once. "I am sorry it was painful." He did not ask whose fault it had been. He did not ask what mistakes either of them had made. He simply reached for the paper cup she was carrying before it slipped from her hand in the breeze and continued walking beside her as though her past deserved respect instead of investigation. That small moment stayed with Claire far longer than any grand romantic gesture could have. She realized she had spent years believing love needed to be earned through sacrifice. Nathan quietly showed her that genuine care often appeared in ordinary moments that expected nothing in return. As time passed, Claire also discovered that Nathan lived a surprisingly private life. His home was comfortable without being extravagant. His clothes were well made but understated. He drove a modest luxury sedan that attracted little attention. Whenever people recognized him in public, they greeted him warmly, yet he always redirected the conversation toward the other person instead of himself. Claire assumed he managed a successful investment company because that was all he ever volunteered. She never pushed for more details because she had learned that character mattered more than titles. One crisp autumn evening, Nathan invited Claire to a botanical garden illuminated by thousands of tiny white lights for a seasonal charity event. As they walked beneath glowing trees, he stopped beside a quiet fountain. There was no crowd waiting. No orchestra hidden behind the hedges. He simply looked into her eyes with calm certainty and said, "The happiest part of my week is every moment I spend with you. If you believe we can continue building a peaceful life together, I would be honored to become your husband." Claire smiled through grateful tears, not because the proposal was extravagant, but because every word sounded completely sincere. She answered yes before he had even finished smiling. They chose a small wedding attended only by close family members and lifelong friends. There were no magazine photographs, no celebrity guests, and no public announcements. The day was filled with laughter, handwritten vows, and quiet promises that valued honesty over spectacle. Claire never imagined that keeping their marriage private would one day become the reason an entire ballroom would stand frozen in disbelief. Back at the charity gala, she glanced discreetly toward the elegant entrance before checking the time on her watch. Nathan had promised he would come as soon as a meeting across town concluded. She trusted his word without anxiety because he had never given her a reason to doubt it. Across the room, Ethan interpreted her brief look toward the entrance very differently. He assumed she was waiting for a colleague or perhaps hoping someone important might notice her. With quiet confidence returning to his expression, he convinced himself that the evening still belonged to him, never realizing that every passing minute was carrying the truth closer to the ballroom doors. The master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage, his warm voice gently drawing the attention of hundreds of guests away from their conversations. Crystal glasses settled onto linen-covered tables, the string quartet softened its melody, and the ballroom gradually became quiet enough for every word to carry beneath the towering chandeliers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began with a welcoming smile, "thank you for joining us this evening in support of educational opportunities that will change countless young lives. We are deeply grateful for every donor, volunteer, and sponsor who has made tonight possible." A round of applause filled the room before fading into attentive silence once again. Ethan slipped one hand into his pocket, confident that the formal program would unfold exactly like every other charity event he had attended. Olivia leaned comfortably beside him, admiring the elegant decorations while occasionally greeting familiar faces passing nearby. Across the ballroom, Claire remained remarkably composed. She listened politely to the opening remarks, accepted another glass of sparkling water from a passing server, and glanced almost instinctively toward the entrance before returning her attention to the stage. Ethan noticed the movement immediately. "She keeps looking at the door," Olivia whispered. "Maybe she is waiting for someone after all." Ethan followed Claire's line of sight for only a second before shrugging with quiet confidence. "Probably another guest." He sounded certain, yet something about Claire's calm patience refused to fit the story he had already created in his own mind. She was not checking her phone every few seconds. She was not pacing nervously. She simply waited with the relaxed certainty of someone who trusted that the right person would arrive exactly when he promised. The master of ceremonies continued speaking about scholarship recipients, community programs, and the generosity of local businesses before smiling toward the audience once again. "There is one individual we especially wish to recognize this evening," he announced. "Unfortunately, an unavoidable business meeting delayed his arrival, but we have just received confirmation that our principal benefactor is now on his way." A ripple of quiet excitement moved through the ballroom. Several executives exchanged knowing smiles. Members of the organizing committee straightened their jackets and whispered brief instructions to one another. Staff members discreetly repositioned themselves closer to the entrance without drawing unnecessary attention. Ethan noticed the sudden change in energy but thought very little of it. Every large fundraiser had an important donor. There was nothing unusual about that. Still, he found himself glancing once more toward Claire. She had not moved. Her expression remained peaceful, almost as though the announcement had confirmed something she already knew. Olivia folded her hands together with curiosity. "Do you know who they are talking about?" she asked quietly. Ethan shook his head. "No, but whoever it is must be writing a very large check." A nearby guest overheard the conversation and smiled politely. "Much more than that," the older gentleman said. "The foundation would not exist in its current form without him." Before Ethan could ask another question, the guest excused himself to greet someone across the room. The orchestra paused. The ballroom doors remained closed, yet conversations had nearly disappeared altogether. It was as if the entire evening had begun waiting for a single arrival. Claire lowered her eyes briefly, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her gown with one graceful motion before lifting her head again. There was no excitement on her face, only quiet certainty. Ethan watched her without understanding why that confidence unsettled him more with every passing second. Somewhere beyond the heavy ballroom doors, footsteps echoed faintly through the marble corridor. The organizing committee turned almost in perfect unison toward the entrance. Ethan instinctively followed their gaze, still believing he was about to witness the arrival of an influential stranger. He had no idea that within moments, the person everyone had been waiting to welcome would transform not only the atmosphere of the evening, but every assumption he had carried into the room. The ballroom doors opened without fanfare, yet the effect was immediate. Conversations faded naturally as heads turned toward the entrance, not because anyone had been instructed to stop speaking, but because recognition spread through the room faster than sound itself. Nathan Cole stepped inside wearing a perfectly tailored midnight navy tuxedo that reflected almost none of the attention surrounding him. He did not pause for dramatic effect. He did not wave or acknowledge the curious glances gathering from every corner of the ballroom. Instead, he offered a warm handshake to the event director waiting near the entrance, thanked her quietly for organizing another successful fundraiser, and continued walking with the calm confidence of a man who never measured his worth by how many people noticed him. Within seconds, members of the board approached him one after another. The chairman greeted him first. Then 2 university presidents. Then the director of the Scholarship Foundation. Several respected business leaders stepped aside to allow him through, each smiling with genuine admiration rather than obligation. Ethan watched the scene unfold with growing confusion. He leaned slightly toward a nearby executive whom he recognized from previous networking events. "Who is that?" he asked in a lowered voice. The executive looked surprised that the question even needed an answer. "That is Nathan Cole," he replied. "He owns Cole Strategic Holdings. His foundation has funded educational programs across the country for years. Half the people in this room owe their biggest charitable projects to his support." Ethan felt something tighten inside his chest, although he quickly dismissed it. The name sounded familiar, but he could not immediately place where he had heard it. Olivia quietly searched her memory as well. "I think I have seen him in a magazine," she whispered. "He rarely gives interviews," the executive added with a respectful smile. "He lets his work speak for itself." Nathan continued greeting volunteers by name, thanking servers who had worked previous charity events, and stopping briefly to congratulate several scholarship recipients standing near the stage. No cameras followed him because he had specifically declined media coverage earlier that evening. Even so, the respect surrounding him was impossible to ignore. It was not the admiration reserved for celebrity. It was something steadier, built over years of integrity that could not be purchased overnight. Claire watched quietly from across the ballroom. She did not raise her hand or call his name. She simply smiled with the peaceful certainty of someone who already knew exactly who he was when no one else happened to be watching. Nathan finally lifted his eyes from a conversation with the foundation director. The moment he saw Claire, his expression softened almost imperceptibly. He excused himself politely, thanked the guests surrounding him, and changed direction without hesitation. Ethan followed every step with increasing disbelief. Nathan was not walking toward the stage where the organizers waited. He was not approaching the board members eager to speak with him. He was crossing the ballroom. Directly toward Claire. One by one, guests instinctively stepped aside, creating an open path neither of them had requested. Olivia noticed it at the same moment Ethan did. "He knows her," she whispered, unable to hide the surprise in her voice. Ethan did not answer. His eyes remained fixed on the quiet reunion unfolding before him. Nathan stopped in front of Claire with the relaxed smile of someone arriving home after an ordinary day at work. "I am sorry I kept you waiting," he said gently. Claire smiled back with effortless warmth. "You are exactly when you said you would be." Around them, the ballroom grew strangely still. Ethan could not explain why, but the certainty he had carried into the evening began slipping away one silent heartbeat at a time as he watched the most important man in the room look at his former wife as though everyone else had simply disappeared. For a brief moment, the enormous ballroom seemed to forget its own purpose. Conversations faded into silence as Nathan and Claire stood together beneath the soft glow of the crystal chandeliers, neither of them attempting to become the center of attention, yet somehow becoming exactly that. Nathan looked at Claire with quiet affection, the kind that had been built through ordinary mornings, shared laughter, difficult days, and countless promises faithfully kept. Without speaking another word, he gently reached for her hand. The gesture lasted only a second, but it changed everything. There was no dramatic announcement. No performance. No effort to impress anyone watching. It was simply the natural movement of a husband greeting the woman he loved after arriving later than expected. Ethan felt the color drain from his face before he fully understood why. Olivia looked from Nathan to Claire and back again, trying to make sense of what everyone else around them already appeared to know. A member of the foundation board approached with a welcoming smile. "Nathan, we are so grateful you made it. And Claire, it is wonderful to see you again." Nathan shook the gentleman's hand warmly before turning slightly toward Claire. "Thank you," he replied. "I promised my wife I would not miss this evening." The word seemed to echo through Ethan's thoughts long after it had been spoken. My wife. 2 simple words. Nothing more. Yet they quietly erased every assumption he had carried into the ballroom. Olivia's eyes widened ever so slightly as she looked toward Claire. She had expected awkwardness, perhaps an old friendship, or even a professional connection. She had never imagined that the woman Ethan once believed would always remain part of his past had built an entirely new future beside one of the most respected men in the room. Guests standing nearby smiled naturally, as though the relationship was already common knowledge among those who attended these events regularly. Several greeted Claire by name before complimenting a recent literacy initiative she had helped organize. One woman thanked her personally for mentoring young volunteers throughout the year. Another guest mentioned seeing Nathan and Claire together at a children's hospital fundraiser the previous month. None of the conversations focused on wealth. None of them praised expensive homes or successful investments. Instead, they spoke about generosity, commitment, and the quiet consistency with which both of them supported causes that mattered. Ethan listened without moving. He realized with growing discomfort that Claire was not admired because of the man standing beside her. She had earned genuine respect in her own right long before anyone mentioned Nathan's name. Nathan turned toward Claire again, noticing that she still held the glass of sparkling water she had barely touched all evening. "Have you eaten anything yet?" he asked gently. Claire smiled and laughed softly. "I was waiting for you." "Then we should fix that," he replied with the same quiet warmth that had first won her trust years earlier. It was such an ordinary exchange that it somehow carried more meaning than any extravagant declaration could have. Ethan remembered another time when Claire had waited for someone to come home for dinner. He remembered promises that had slowly disappeared beneath ambition. Standing only a few yards away, he finally understood the difference between being admired for success and being valued for character. Nathan never once looked toward Ethan with triumph. Claire never searched for his reaction. Neither of them seemed interested in proving anything at all. Their attention remained completely on each other, leaving the past exactly where it belonged. Olivia slowly lowered her gaze, gently removing her hand from Ethan's arm without realizing she had done so. Around them, conversations gradually resumed, but the atmosphere had quietly changed. The greatest revelation of the evening had not been that Nathan Cole possessed extraordinary wealth. It was that Claire Bennett had found a life so deeply rooted in peace that she no longer needed anyone from her past to recognize her worth. The remainder of the evening unfolded with quiet elegance, yet for Ethan every familiar sound seemed strangely distant. Applause filled the ballroom as scholarship recipients accepted awards, conversations resumed around beautifully decorated tables, and soft music returned beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. Life continued exactly as it should have, but something inside him had shifted in a way he had never anticipated. For years he had believed success could be measured by titles, recognition, and the admiration of strangers. Standing only a few yards away from Claire, he finally realized that the peace reflected in her smile could not be purchased, negotiated, or inherited. It had been earned through years of rebuilding a life that no longer depended on anyone else's approval. Nathan spent the rest of the evening introducing Claire to donors, educators, and community leaders with the same simple words every time. "This is my wife, Claire." He never mentioned her past. He never described what she had overcome. He spoke about her literacy programs, her volunteer work, and the countless hours she devoted to helping young students believe in their own potential. Every introduction reminded the room that Claire was respected because of the person she had chosen to become. Ethan listened quietly, remembering a younger version of himself who had once promised to build a future beside the woman now standing across the ballroom. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that he had mistaken ambition for wisdom and achievement for fulfillment. Olivia noticed the silence that had settled over him. She gently slipped her hand into his and offered a small, understanding smile. She did not ask difficult questions because she sensed he was already asking them himself. There was no anger between them, only the quiet awareness that every person carried choices they could never completely undo. Across the room, Claire happened to glance toward Ethan one final time. Their eyes met for only a brief second. She did not smile with triumph. She did not look away with resentment. She simply offered the same calm expression she had shown from the beginning of the evening, a look free from blame, free from regret, and completely free from the need to prove anything. Ethan returned the smallest nod, understanding that some apologies could never be spoken with words alone. Moments later, Nathan quietly asked Claire if she was ready to leave. She looked around the ballroom one last time before answering with a contented smile. "Yes. I think it has been a beautiful evening." Nathan thanked the event organizers personally, congratulated the scholarship recipients once more, and walked toward the entrance beside Claire with his hand gently resting in hers. No dramatic farewell followed them. No crowd gathered to watch them leave. The most remarkable part of their departure was how completely natural it felt. They were simply two people walking toward the life they had built together, leaving the past exactly where it belonged. Ethan remained standing beneath the chandeliers long after they disappeared through the ballroom doors. He realized Claire had never returned to make him regret his decisions. She had returned because she no longer organized her life around them at all. The greatest surprise of the evening had not been discovering that she had married an extraordinarily successful man. It had been discovering that she had become someone whose happiness no longer depended on being chosen, admired, or remembered by the person who once walked away. Outside, the cool night air welcomed Claire and Nathan as they stepped into the quiet city lights. Together. She slipped her arm through his with effortless comfort, and they disappeared into the evening without looking back. Some victories arrive with applause, while others leave so quietly that only the heart recognizes them. Claire did not reclaim the life she had lost. She created a better one. She did not win because Ethan failed. She won because she finally discovered that dignity shines brightest when it no longer asks anyone for permission to glow.